What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Christian Hannah Hall here today with a new series we're doing called Original versus Remake, and I thought today would be a good day to start off with my favorite horror franchise ever made, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, the purpose of this video is not to say one is good and one is bad. The purpose is to just give my perspective on horror movies and to show that maybe not all remakes are just complete wastes of time. I'm not saying that the remake is going to win in this case, but we're going to do a lot of movies in this series, and some of them I believe will actually come out on top for the remakes, and not always, but sometimes. And it's just to give my perspective. So let's get started. I'm going to talk about what I like about the original, then what I like about the remake. When it comes to the 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street, we got a lot of great things. First off, Wes Craven, who is undeniably one of the greatest horror directors as we know. We also have Johnny Depp. This is his first movie he's ever done, and I thought he did a really good job. There's really not a complaint acting-wise at all from this movie that I could think of that was just a problem. I think everybody in this movie's acting was, fairly well done. Robert Englund, do I need to say anything about Robert Englund that hasn't already been said? One of the greatest horror icons ever, and Robert Englund is just a true hero. I mean, he's that good. He is a performer like no other, and his portrayal of Freddy Krueger, specifically in the first movie, was probably perfect. It probably streamlined the rest of the 80s as far as horror characters were concerned, and it definitely changed the world of horror. I think that's not really even an argument for some people. They agree that, Robert is probably the king of horror movies, if not one of them. When it comes to any sort of negative for the 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street, I don't know that I have any. You gotta understand, this was a groundbreaking film in terms of what they did. A lot of the effects done in this movie were so real. They had to literally take a room and make it go upside down to show a girl being dragged across the roof in the bedroom. They had to drag a room upside down to show blood spurting out of the bed. They had to do a lot of really cool practical effects. One in particular was the spandex, where it looked like Freddy was coming through the wall. While it sounds so cheap to do, on film it looks so real because it's in camera and it's real. So for the 1984 Nightmare on Elm Street, I don't know that there's anything bad about it. The only thing that might come across as a tad bit hokey. Now, this is not necessarily my opinion, but the things that I see of online. There's a scene where Freddy's supposed to have these really, really long arms. He's walking down this girl's backyard. Now, what you're seeing is Freddy walking down, and his arms look like they're both 12, 15 feet long, and they're being held by fishing wire. And that sounds kind of hokey, but honestly, to me, it does come across on screen really, really creepy, because yet again, it's something that's actually real and in camera. Another thing that might come across is just a tad bit hokey for some people is at the very end, when Freddy pulls in Nancy's mom, it's a blow-up doll, more or less, and while you can kind of tell that's what it is, it happens so fast that it almost matches that dreamlike state. So for the 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street, I really give the movie a solid 9.8 out of 10. I'll deduct 0.2 points for those minor things that people like to complain about with the movie. Let's talk about the remake. So the remake for Nightmare on Elm Street, unlike Halloween or unlike Friday the 13th, the big thing this thing had going against it was its main villain. We're talking about something that is so incredibly identifiable, it's the number one thing people think about when they think of Nightmare on Elm Street. Collectively, I think with Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger is the only thing that really resonates high in people's minds. So to have to recast Freddy was going to be an uphill battle no matter who did the job. With all that being said, Jackie Earle Haley coming in, I thought did a pretty decent job. My complaint is not necessarily his performance, but the way that he was told to basically kind of portray this character. I would have liked to have seen him had more of a personality, but true to his own self, not trying to mimic Robert Englund. There were some instances where you could almost notice a tad bit of CGI on Freddy, and then I watched the behind the scenes of the making of this. They actually had green spots on his face to then CGI in. I don't see why that was necessary. If you could make the makeup look as incredible as it did in the 80s, there's really no excuse to have to do this sort of thing in 2010, in my opinion. One thing that I thought was really gutsy in the remake that did not happen in the 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street was this. In a 1984 Elm Street, Wes changed it to Freddy being a child killer because as strange as this sounds, it was a lot softer than saying he was a child molester. Now, I can kind of understand that because this was a huge problem coming around in the 80s that was coming across papers and television, and it did not sit well with anybody. But what was really gutsy in the remake was they basically, without literally saying it, let you know that Freddy was in fact a child molester, and that is gutsy because it really makes him a villain to the 10th degree. You could argue that it was subtext in 1984, but I still credit the 2010 movie for going that route more so than the 1984 movie did. Really gutsy, and just hard to swallow thinking about. I liked Nancy in the remake. I'm not going to say I liked her more than the 1984 Nancy, but I dare say I liked her just as much. I'm a bigger fan of the more subdued final girls that are more quiet, withdrawn in themselves. Nancy in the remake was a little bit more brash, a little bit more loud, and some people prefer that. Me personally, I like a little bit more of a subdued, laid-back character. I think that's why I enjoyed Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie Strode in 2018 rather than Halloween H2O. So character-wise, we had some pretty good characters, but some of them just fall slightly short in terms of what they were trying to do in the movie. Now, the boy who basically goes through the movie with Nancy through the remake, I do enjoy his performance, but the guy who gets killed in the jail cell, he kind of fell short for me. He just didn't have a whole lot going on. The only thing I didn't like about the remake as well was it did have a little bit too much of a Hollywood look. These people don't necessarily look like teenagers. I'm not saying that the 1984 looked really like teenagers, but I dare say they did seem more like, you know, seniors in high school more so than the 2010 movie. The 2010 movie looked like these were 27-year-old people, and they probably were. The 2010 remake did have some good stuff. I did like that they kind of modernized the Freddy coming through the wall, but it did not have the same effect, I've got to be honest. All in all, I still think Jackie Earle Haley did a good job. I just think he would have been allowed a little bit more reign to kind of express himself a little bit more and have a little bit more of a different vibe. You could clearly tell that his voice was edited in post and have all these creepy, ghostly effects to it with a low vibrato behind his voice, and it just comes across a little too much for me. I would have liked to see more of a real honest approach for the voicing of Freddy in this movie. So with all that being said, I'm gonna have to pick one, and to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure you can all see that while I do think both of these have their good merits, and one in particular has a little bit more flaws, I've got to give it to the original 1984, A Nightmare on Elm Street. It is probably one of the greatest horror movies ever made. I would probably put it in the top 10 easy. But that's not to say that the 2010, I think, is a complete waste of time. I actually think it's a decent little remake. And in terms of it being a horror movie in today's day and age, well, I still think it's a decent movie to watch. I'd probably give it like a 5.9 out of 10. Please be sure to drop your comments, guys, and let me know a movie you would like to see done on original versus remake right here on Christian Hannah Horror. It's going to be interesting to do certain movies that I already know in my head I prefer the remake, and some of these movies I'm going to have to go back and rewatch to really decide because there are some really good remakes out there. So drop your comment below and let me know which movie you'd like to see me do on this show. Please check the description for the Teespring and the Patreon. There's a lot of great tiers and a lot of great shirts you guys can get your hands on. This is Christian Hannah Horror. Thank you guys for watching this video, and tell me which movie you prefer. See you guys next time.